In a quiet coastal village tucked between rocky cliffs and windswept beaches, there was a small wooden house at the edge of town. Its paint had long faded from salt air and storms, its garden overgrown and wild. But every night, without fail, a single lantern glowed gently from its porch, casting a warm golden light that swayed softly in the ocean breeze. The villagers had grown used to it. Some found comfort in its glow as they walked home at dusk, while others shook their heads and whispered about the old man who lived there, Mr. Elias Carter, a widower in his 70s with silver hair and a weathered face etched by sea and sorrow. Elias's life had been ordinary once. A young fisherman, a loving husband, and a devoted father to his only child, Thomas. His wife Anna had died many years ago, and afterward, it had just been the two of them, father and son, casting nets by day and sharing stories by night. But 15 years ago, on a stormy autumn evening, Thomas had set out alone to sea. The weather had turned suddenly violent, and though the other boats returned, battered but safe, Thomas never came home. They found his boat days later, wrecked and half buried in kelp on the rocks. But of Thomas there was no sign. The villagers mourned quietly and moved on, but not Elias. From the night of the storm until now, Elias had lit that lantern every evening and hung it by his front porch. When asked, he would simply say, "It's for Thomas, so he can find his way home." Over the years, neighbors offered sympathy, gentle advice, and later, awkward silence. Some called him a foolish old man who couldn't face reality. Others pitied his devotion. But every night as dusk fell, Elias climbed the creaky wooden steps to his porch, lit the lantern with trembling hands, and sat beside it in his rocking chair, his tired eyes scanning the dark horizon where sea met sky. Inside his home, nothing had changed since Thomas left. His son's fishing gear still leaned by the door, a jacket still hung on its peg, and a cup, Thomas's favorite, sat waiting by the kitchen table. In the village pub, younger fishermen would sometimes laugh softly and wonder aloud why Elias kept waiting. 15 years, they whispered. Surely he knows by now. But some of the older villagers understood. They too had lost sons and brothers to the sea, though none had kept waiting as long as Elias had. Each day passed much like the last. Elias woke early, tended the little garden Anna once loved, walked to the edge of the shore where he watched the waves for hours, and then returned to light the lantern before the night came in. Children sometimes passed his house on dares, staring at the quiet old man on his porch, watching as he polished the glass of the lantern before lighting it. They didn't know the depth of his routine. For Elias, the lantern was more than a ritual. It was hope itself. Even if it was fragile, even if he no longer truly believed his son would walk back through that weathered gate. But he could not let the light go out, not yet. That evening, as the sun dipped below the waves, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and red, Elias struck a match and carefully lit the wick inside the lantern. The flame flickered for a moment, then caught, steady and warm. He sat in his rocking chair, gazing out across the water, the rhythm of the waves matching the slow creak of the chair beneath him. And as darkness fell over the village, the lantern glowed, a soft, steady beacon on the edge of town. The villagers no longer looked toward it, but Elias did. He always would. The seasons came and went in the small coastal village, as steady as the tide itself. But for Elias Carter, time felt strangely suspended, frozen in the 15 years since that night the storm took Thomas from him. Each day he lived alone in the weathered wooden house by the sea, and each evening he lit the lantern, hanging it carefully on the old hook outside the front porch. The villagers no longer spoke openly about it, but they noticed. They always noticed. Some secretly admired his loyalty. Others whispered that his heart was broken beyond repair. It was in early spring, when the wind still carried a salty chill, but the flowers had begun to bloom again, that a new visitor appeared in the village, a young woman named Claire. She was an artist from the city, staying in a rented cottage nearby. Drawn by the stories she'd heard, Claire wandered one evening toward Elias's house, sketchpad in hand. From a distance, she saw him, thin and stooped, silver hair glinting in the fading light, rocking gently beside the glowing lantern. There was something haunting about the image. The lantern's soft golden glow against the gray house and endless sea behind it. The next evening she returned, this time sketching quietly from a rock nearby. When Elias noticed her, he didn't speak, only offered a brief nod before turning his gaze back to the horizon. Claire became a quiet presence over the following days. Sometimes she brought a thermos of tea and left a cup for Elias on his porch without a word. Other times she sat nearby, sketching him and his ever-burning lantern. Finally, one dusk as she approached, she spoke softly. "Mr. Carter, may I ask you something?" Elias didn't look at her at first. The creak of his rocking chair continued. The lantern was already lit, swaying gently in the evening breeze. "You may," he answered at last, his voice rough but kind. "Why do you keep lighting it? After all these years?" she asked gently, careful not to sound like she was mocking him. "Do you truly believe he's still out there?" For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the sigh of waves against the shore. Then Elias turned toward her, his lined face softening. "It's not about what I believe anymore," he said slowly. "It's about what I promised." Claire lowered her sketchpad, leaning forward. "A promise?" Elias nodded. "Thomas was only 8 years old when Anna died. I told him, whenever he went out to sea, I'd always leave a light burning so he could find his way home, no matter what." His gaze drifted back to the horizon. "I promised, and promises, they matter." Claire swallowed hard, her throat tight. "But Mr. Carter, it's been so long." "Yes," he said quietly, "and perhaps I know deep down he's never coming back. The sea, it doesn't give back what it's taken." He looked at her, a sad smile touching his lips. "But it doesn't matter. I made him that promise. The light is for him, and maybe it's for me too." That night, Claire sat beside him in silence until the stars emerged, her sketch forgotten in her lap. In the days that followed, villagers noticed something unusual. Claire had begun painting a mural on the side of the old bakery in the village square. Slowly but surely, the image took shape. The outline of a house by the sea, an old man sitting in a rocking chair, and a single lantern burning bright against the dusk sky. Some villagers helped her, moved by the scene. Others simply watched from afar. Elias didn't comment. He saw the mural when he walked into town for supplies, and he simply tipped his cap to Claire as she worked. But that evening, when he returned home, he polished the lantern more carefully than usual. His fingers traced its worn brass edges, and he replaced the wick with a fresh one he'd saved in a drawer for years. Then came a stormy night, much like the one that had taken Thomas 15 years earlier. The wind howled, waves crashed violently on the shore, and rain lashed against Elias's windows. Villagers huddled in their homes, afraid of the gale. But late into the night, one or two glanced toward the edge of the village and saw it. The lantern was still there, glowing steadily in the darkness, swaying furiously in the wind, but never going out. Inside, Elias sat beside it, rocking gently, his gaze distant but resolute. Claire, watching from her cottage window, felt a lump rise in her throat. It was as if that single flickering light was holding back the night itself. The storm passed by morning, leaving the village drenched and silent. Branches lay strewn along narrow paths. Fishing boats bobbed uneasily at anchor, and puddles reflected the gray, heavy sky. But at the edge of town, by the weathered house where Elias Carter lived, the lantern still hung, battered but glowing, its flame small but steadfast. That morning, Claire visited as she had every day since they first spoke. She brought 2 cups of tea and a small loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. But as she stepped through the gate, a chill ran through her. The rocking chair was empty. The lantern still burned, but Elias was nowhere to be seen. A sense of unease crept over her as she gently knocked on the door. When there was no answer, she opened it slowly, the hinges creaking, and stepped inside. His house was quiet, still smelling faintly of salt and old wood. Everything was as she had always seen it. Thomas's coat on the hook, his boots by the door, the old fishing net leaning against the wall. And then she saw him. Elias sat in his armchair by the cold fireplace, his hands folded neatly in his lap, his face peaceful. A small, worn photograph of Thomas rested on the table beside him, next to a lantern wick and a box of matches. He was gone. Word spread quickly through the village. For a long while, people simply stood outside his house, some removing their caps, others bowing their heads quietly. He had become a part of the village's landscape, his nightly ritual woven into their lives, even if they hadn't fully realized it until now. The mayor, an elderly man himself, arranged a modest funeral. Fishermen, old and young, gathered to pay their respects. Some who had once laughed at Elias's devotion stood now with somber eyes, recognizing the depth of his grief, the power of his love. Claire was there, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. Before they lowered the casket, she stepped forward with a simple request. Could we hang his lantern one more time? And so they did. The villagers carried Elias's lantern and hung it from the post on his porch, lighting it as he had every evening for 15 years. That night, as darkness settled over the village, the lantern glowed softly one last time, a quiet tribute to a father who had never stopped waiting. In the days that followed, the villagers discussed what to do with his house. Some suggested selling it, others thought it should be left to fall into disrepair. But Claire offered a different idea. What if we leave the lantern? Just the lantern. Let it keep burning. Not for Thomas, not for Elias, but for anyone who's lost someone and is still waiting. The villagers agreed. A small plaque was affixed beneath the lantern that read, "For all who wait, for all who hope." Claire returned to the mural she had been painting in the village square. With careful brush strokes, she added one final detail. In the sky behind Elias and his lantern, she painted a ghostly silhouette of Thomas standing by the shore, watching the light from a distance, a soft smile on his face. The mural became a place where villagers paused as they passed, some leaving flowers, others simply sitting quietly. Years later, the old wooden house remained. It began to lean slightly with age, its paint peeled even more, its windows cloudy. But the lantern was still there, and each evening a villager, young or old, would walk out to Elias's porch and light it. It no longer belonged to one man. It belonged to everyone now. Some said that on certain foggy nights, if you stood by the shore and looked back toward the village, you could see 2 figures on the porch, an old man in a rocking chair, and a younger man standing beside him. And perhaps, at last, Elias Carter was no longer waiting alone.